All right, the computer is not working today. So, until we get it working, I will have you guys go ahead and take the quiz. That is your question. Okay, it's an attempt to end war. End war where? Everywhere. Right? How well does it work? Yeah. So time frame?
In 1941, I think Japan invaded China.
So,
Some point China.
yeah.
Sure.
So in 1941, the U.S. or Japan actually attacks the U.S.
Oh, it was the US.
So
it was
yes, this is created in the 1920s, and by 1935, we already have conflict between people that becomes World War II, right? So, I mean, it's a really nice, fluffy little paper, but it really means nothing. So, all right. What are we talking about today? All right, you guys are all going to be depressed, right? All right. So, well, first, if you remember, last class period, we talked about women getting the right to vote. Why was that important? Okay. Why was it super important that they get the vote in early 1920? What happens in 1920?
Women are gone. They're at the wars. They're in the factories. Women are in the factories.
Okay, so in 17 through 19, the women are in the factories, and that's how they get get the right to vote. But what happens in 1920? What happens every 4 years? A presidential election. So in 1920, the Democrats select a guy named James Cox. Now the intriguing thing is Wilson wants to run again. What do we know about Wilson's last 17 months in office? Yeah, he had a stroke. Is he being a great president? No. In fact, for most of the time, his wife and his doctor are the only one that can go see him, so his wife is running the presidency. If you are the Democratic Party, do you want to renominate Wilson? No. All right. So they grab a guy named James Cox. James Cox basically just rolls in and says, hey, what we've been doing is good and we will continue to do more of the same. The Republicans nominated a guy named Warren G. Harding. Harding promises a return to normalcy. So, what does normalcy mean to you? Okay, stability. Comfortable. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts? Is normalcy a good thing?
Can be.
Okay. What has happened in the last 10 years or so prior to 1920?
World War I.
World War I, the flappers. You have all sorts of stuff going on, changes, the Industrial Revolution, right? And he's like, let's return to normalcy. That is a brilliant, brilliant political statement, right? Because returning to normalcy, if I ask you guys on a quiz to define normalcy to me, would you feel comfortable doing that?
Yes.
Huh?
I do.
Okay. So you could define it for you, right? But do you think you and Lydia would have the same perspective on what normalcy means?
Probably not. No,
Okay.
I'm at a different stage of life than her.
Yeah.
So,
And that's the piece that I think is brilliant about this, is normalcy means whatever you think it means, right? Normalcy means we're going to go back to the way I wanted it to be, back to how it should be, but he doesn't define what this should be means, right? So, doesn't that sound like a great idea? All right, everybody likes that idea. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy. He does say, in specifics, he wants to preserve the peace without having the League of Nations. Why is this a big deal?
Because the League of Nations was made to keep peace.
Okay, the League of Nations made to keep peace, but what does it take from the U.S.? What is the concern that the Republicans in Congress have about the League of Nations?
that it doesn't put us in full power of it.
Okay, because the U.S. has to give up authority to the League of Nations, and the League of Nations gets to say, do you get to do something, do you not get to do something in the international community? Is that what Americans are going to want? No. They have said, no, we're not going this direction. So even though we want peace, we don't want someone else how to get that, to tell us how to get that peace. He also claims that Wilson left the nation unprepared for war and unprepared for peace, which is a pretty harsh slap, right? All right. So the Democrats press for the League of Nations. They press for several other progressive causes. But there's a third candidate this time. Eugene Debs is a socialist. And he actually runs for president from prison. Why is he in prison?
Because he's a socialist.
Well, during World War I, he was a socialist, and because he's a socialist, he doesn't like the war. He believes that the war is a capitalist war. And if you remember, they came up with a law, the Sedition Act, and it said, what can you go to jail for in World War I?
Pretty much speaking against them.
Speaking against the war or the government or anything else. He was speaking to some union leaders, and he's talking, and he really tried to be very cautious not to step over the line, but he stepped over the line, and he was jailed. So he runs for president from prison. So who do you think is going to win this? The president who's been in bed for the last 17 months, the socialist who's in prison, or Warren G. Harding? Harding wins. He takes 60.5% of the popular vote. It is the largest popular vote margin in U.S. history. So Harding is now the president. If Harding's the president and he wants to return to normalcy, what do you think some of the big things that he's going to push for are? The first thing he pushes for is to reduce the national debt. And he reduces taxes on the wealthy. Now, presumably, that's not necessarily why everybody voted for him, right? And so a lot of people say, well, he was anti-progressive. Now, the weird part is he puts Taft on the Supreme Court. Now, if you're putting Taft on the Supreme Court, are you pro-progressive or anti-progressive? What is Taft?
Progressive.
He is one of the 3 progressive presidents, right? So if you put Taft on the Supreme Court, what has that effectively done? All of the lawsuits, all of the things that go to the Supreme Court, which direction are they going to move? They're going to move more progressive, right? So it's interesting that people say, well, he's a non-progressive, but then he throws a very strong progressive onto the Supreme Court. And because Taft is on the Supreme Court, they are able to enact child labor laws and get those through the courts. The minimum wage for women, significant support for unions, and significant support for federal regulations on corporations that help reduce the size. So it's interesting that you kind of have both ways. Now, anybody know what Harding is known for? Corruption. It's really kind of sad. Harding he rolls in as president. He brings in people from outside Washington, people that he worked with prior to this. And the problem is some of those are extremely corrupt. So they set up and they have the Teapot Dome scandal, which is where they are selling an oil lease in Wyoming and making a lot of money on that. They are also, some of his guys that work for him are taking bribes and making businesses on the side, working with people to get laws enacted, but you'll pay me for those things. As far as we can tell, Harding was not involved in those acts, and in fact did not know about those things until later in his administration. When he finds out, he actually fires people. He starts taking action, but it's too late. He's already got the reputation. Now, there is a couple other pieces that we really don't talk about, and that's Harding goes down to Alabama Birmingham, Alabama has their 50th anniversary as a city. And it's really cool. We're going to bring the president down and he's going to talk to us, right? So the president goes to Birmingham, Alabama to talk to the city about how great they are. And that's the main focus that everybody is expecting, right? If you bring the president to Claremore, what do you think he should talk about?
Trains.
Yeah, trains and, hey, you guys do a great job and here's wonderful news and thank you for being you. Harding goes down there and Harding replaces Wilson, who has pushed back a lot of the regulations on that has re-implemented segregation in the national government. Harding thinks this is horrible. So he gets invited down to Birmingham. He starts out the conversation very nicely. He's like, hey, I'm really proud of you. You know, you guys have been here for 50 years. You're on the cusp and the edge of the Industrial Revolution here, and you're making things happen, and you're doing really, really good things. While he is talking, Birmingham is divided, right? What divides Birmingham? Segregation. So he is talking. This side of the room is all white. This side of the room is all black. And nobody legally can move to the other side, right? So as he's talking, he's going along and then he says, hey, we've had this war. And World War I reminds me of the Civil War. And in both cases, there have been some issues. And he talks about in World War I, we have had African Americans who fight for the U.S. And he talks about how that's a good thing. And then he says, you know what? If they have fought for the U.S., what do they deserve?
To be treated like citizens.
To be treated like citizens. And he starts out and he says, you know what? I'm not saying every African American person should have the right to vote, but the people who are able to vote, the people who know what they're talking about and have proven that they are good citizens should have the right to vote. And if we say that there are people in the black community who do not have the right to vote because they're not qualified, there are people in the white community who are just as not qualified to vote as people in the black community. Now, at this point in the speech, what do you think has happened?
Got up and left. Or
All the white people are just sitting there like, what? What are you saying? You can't, you know, you're just supposed to be telling us how good we are. What do you think is happening on the black side?
Cheering.
Cheering and screaming and yes. So it's amazing. He goes further and he says, look, I'm not saying that you have to desegregate, but you have to treat people in a way that they deserve to be treated. And he goes through this whole speech. It's interesting because if you read the speech now, you will still say that he was a racist. But what time frame was this? Yeah, this is 1920. So 100 years ago, right? And for a president to go into the South and speak against racial discrimination is unheard of at this point. It is so shocking that the KKK decides that he must be part black himself. Because there's only, that's the only reason that a white person would speak against segregation and against discrimination. And so, intriguingly, just so we're clear, historians have done the work. No, he is not. He's a white guy, but he's a white guy with a conscience. And so he rolls down and he says, look, we need to change some things. We need to fix some things, and you guys can be at the forefront of this, or you can be dragged along kicking and screaming. And so it's pretty amazing that since that time, historians have focused on the scandal and they have not focused very much on his civil rights. The other thing that he works on is war debts. So When Wilson signed the agreement with Europe, what happens with war debts? Does anybody remember what France forced on Wilson? Reparations on Germany. So, according to the agreement, Germany is responsible fully for World War I and owes everyone's debts. So if you paid something during World War I, then Germany owes that money to you. Now, you know as well as I do, anytime that somebody says something like that, you increase what you think you paid, right? That's sort of like if you go to a restaurant and somebody says up front, hey, I'm buying, what does that mean?
And I'm getting alcohol.
Yeah, you're getting alcohol. You're going to go look and see what's the most expensive thing on this menu that I really like. Because, why not? And so France and England have turned to Germany and they go, you owe us millions of dollars. How is Germany doing at this point? Yeah, Germany has been decimated. They don't have the people, their factories, everything has been destroyed, right? So how are they making the money to pay everyone back? They get loans. Who's going to give them a loan? The U.S., which is really stupid when you think about it. So the U.S. has loaned $2 billion to France and England, and we say, we want the money back, right? And France and England goes, we don't owe you that money. We borrowed that money from you, but now Germany owes that money. So they turn to Germany and say, give us the money. And Germany turns to us and says, yeah, we need the money. So what do we wind up doing? Yeah, the U.S. takes our money and hands it through the chain and gives it back to us. Is this really effective? No. All we have done is transfer our loans from England and France to Germany. And so it's really kind of a silly process. It doesn't work, and it really puts Germany in a world of hurt. So what do you think comes of this later? We're not getting into it today, but if Germany owes all this money and every time they try to step out of debt, they just get kicked in the head, what are you going to do?
You're gonna get angry.
Yeah, they get angry and it starts World War II. So basically, our willingness to say Germany owes all the money creates it instigates World War II. All right, one other thing that Harding does that's kind of interesting is to pardon Eugene Debs. Why do you think he would pardon Eugene Debs? First off, what does pardoning mean?
His crimes would be forgiven.
Okay, yeah, his crimes are wiped out. What was his crime again?
Corruption?
Well, Eugene Debs, the socialist who's in jail.
Social.
Disagreed with war.
He disagreed with World War I. Is World War I going on? No. And in fact, a lot of people are talking bad about World War I now. And Eugene Debs ran for president and got a lot of votes. So it really doesn't make any sense for a guy to stay in prison who people really like because he's saying, hey, this is the wrong thing to do. So Harding's like, you know what? Let's go ahead and we'll get him out of jail. And he pardons him. So if we are not going to have the League of Nations, how do you get rid of war? Do you think if we got rid of weapons, we could get rid of war? Because I've heard that from people, right?
If there's a
Okay.
will, there's a way.
Yes. If there's a will to go to war, there is a way to go to war. But at this point, everybody's like, we have to make sure we don't go back to a world war. We have to make sure that we come up with a way to stop fighting. And so the U.S. invites all of the major players that have navies into the U.S. And we say, all right, one of the reasons that we go to war is because we have too many weapons. So if we just get rid of the weapons, then nobody will want to go to war. So they sit down and they say, who needs navies? Now, if you're going to be a major world power, Mahan has said we need a navy, right? And is anybody actually going to be willing to give up completely their navy? No. So if they're not willing to give it up, what can we do instead? Okay, we'll have a treaty that says these people get to have different numbers of navies. All right? So, anybody know what agreement there was? All right, these are the people playing, right? In these groups, who has the largest navies in the world?
America and UK.
Yes, the US and the UK. Why?
Because they're the most powerful of that reason.
Okay, they are the most powerful. And so the US and the UK know that at the end of this, the one thing they have to make sure of is they stay on top. Right? So they have to come up with a way to do this. Now, the third largest navy is Japan's. So what they decide is, of all of these people, who has a responsibility to protect both the Pacific and the Atlantic? The United States and the United Kingdom, right? So if you have a responsibility to protect both the Pacific and the Atlantic, then do you think you need the largest navy? All right. So they say for every 100, we're going to have 500, right? Now, where does Japan have navies? In the Pacific, right? So if Japan has navies in the Pacific, then they need a little bit more. So we'll put a 3 here, right? Where do France and Italy have their navies?
Just the Atlantic.
Okay.
So what were you needing help getting signed into?
Just the computer, it's not.
Okay. The default RSU Instruct account let me sign in. Was that where you were having issues getting signed in with?
Yes.
Okay.
So it works, I guess.
All right.
All right. They said France and Italy are only putting ships into the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, right? So if these are in the Atlantic, they don't need as much as in the Pacific. So at the end of the day, they came up with these numbers and they said for every 1.67 thousand tons that Italy gets to have, France gets to have the same. Japan gets to have a little more, and the US and the UK get to have a lot more. What does this ensure?
That the US and UK stay on top.
That the US and the UK stay on top. Why is this important?
They're the most powerful.
Because they're on top now and they are going to stay on top. And so it's interesting to me that basically they have said what we want to do is we're not going to let Japan, because that's the real fear, get as many ships as the US and the UK. Why might that be important?
Because Japan is starting to become one of the most powerful militaries in the world.
Yes, Japan is one of the most powerful militaries in the world, and they are expanding. And so it's scaring England and the US. And so they're like, no, we're not going to have this. All right, hopefully we will get up in just a minute and we will be back going. All right, we are working. All right. So we've talked about the five-power treaty. It also outlaws new bases in the Pacific. Who has bases in the Pacific? England, US, Japan. Again, the reason they outlaw new bases is because the most likely one to change that is going to be Japan, right? The other thing is a four-power treaty. The four-power treaty, prior to this time, the United Kingdom had been protecting Japan against other countries. But now Japan has defeated China, they have defeated Russia, and during World War I, they took all the German assets in the Pacific. So all the German colonies, all the German weapons, they took over everything there. Now Japan is an offensive power. They are a powerful nation. If you want to, if there's going to be a fight, probably Japan is going to be the one fighting. Now, if the UK says in a treaty that any war they will support Japan, what does that mean for the UK?
They'll get stronger and they will go into war with the UK.
Okay, so either Japan can attack the UK or Japan could attack the United States and England would have to support Japan in the war even if Japan started the conflict. So they don't want to do that. So now what they do is they sign a new treaty and they say, look, we're going to have all four of us will consult before there is any fighting in the Pacific. Now what does that mean? If I tell you that before I give a surprise test, I will consult with you, are you happy with that decision? Okay. Why? Okay, because then you'll know it's coming. But the bad part is I don't say that I will consult with you 2 weeks before the test, so I could just consult with you as you come in, right? Does that require your approval? No. Just means all I have to do is say, hey, I want to let you know this is going to happen, and oh, by the way, it's happening. So is this really a treaty? Is this really going to make a difference in anything? No. All right, and then the nine-power treaty basically says, hey, Japan, you have the authority, you have the ability to control Manchuria, but everybody else is going to be able to do whatever they want to in China. All right. During all these discussions, during all these machinations, Briand, who is the French foreign minister, comes to the United States Secretary of State, and he says, you know what? We love you guys. You guys are a great nation, and we think that we should never, ever have a fight with you. So let's have a treaty that says the U.S. and France will never, ever fight with each other. Now, why do you think Briand wants this treaty?
Because he knows France can't take on the U.S.
Okay, France can't fight with the U.S. and win. This is a recognition that the U.S. is now a solid world power and is more powerful than France. So this allows France to do whatever they want to without the U.S. being able to attack them, right? So if France wanted to, they could take over Mexico. Could the U.S. do anything about it? No, because we have a treaty saying that we can't fight with them. So the U.S. Secretary of State Kellogg doesn't want this treaty. But can you afford to say, oh no, I don't want a treaty that we'll say we won't fight? I mean, this is right after World War I, right? Nobody wants more war. So Kellogg's in a position of saying, I can't turn down a treaty that says we won't fight. So is there any way for him to get out of this treaty? Or at least make it more palatable for the U.S.?
Get a bunch of other countries to sign it.
Yes. Let's say everybody won't go to war. Right? So if I make an agreement in this classroom and I say, none of you will ever say anything rude to the other ones, and we all sign it, is that a credible document? Probably not, realistically. Why? I mean, how old are you guys? Generally. Most of you are in your early 20s, late teens, right? And I'm going to have you sign a document that says you won't fight with somebody for the next probably 60 years. You have no idea what's going to happen in those 60 years, right? So this treaty says we are not going to go to war. How old do countries get to be? Thousands of years old. So I will promise I will never go to war with anyone who signed this treaty ever unless they attack me. It's just really not credible. In fact, they do go ahead and they sign it, and loads of countries sign it. At the end, they bring it back to the U.S. The Senate signs it because no one can afford to not sign it, right? But even then, one of the senators says, this isn't worth the paper it's written on. Right? It's just not credible. So there's a lot of people at this time that are trying to come up with, how do we ensure that we never go to war again? And the real answer is, stop kicking Germany in the teeth while they're down. But nobody will say that. So we're coming up with all these other thoughts and all these other plans. All right. So Harding dies. This is kind of a weird story in itself. Harding has all these scandals, right? So in order to make himself marketable as the president at the next election, what does he need to do? What does Wilson do when he needs to get the American people behind him?
Traveled around the different cities.
Travel around the entire U.S. on a train, talking to people. So Harding gets on a train, and he's cruising around from state to state going, hey, I'm a likable person. You like me, you know me. I'm getting rid of all the people that are conducting the scandals. So you should really, support what I am backing, and you can love me the next time the presidential election comes around. He actually winds up going into Alaska. He's the first president that goes into Alaska as president. He comes back down. He's in Washington, and in Washington, he's presenting. Everything's going well. I think they go down to Oregon. Long story short, his wife is with him. On this trip, his wife discovers another problem. This is a scandal, but it's not a scandal with politics. So, what kind of scandal do you think we're talking about?
An affair.
An affair. His wife finds out that he's having an affair. This is never a good thing, right? And so, somehow, she is still staying with him. In fact, they go to a restaurant, they have dinner, everything is going well. They come back to the hotel. He is laying on the bed. His wife is reading him news articles about how great a president he is. And he has indigestion, and the next thing you know, he dies. Now, if you are living at this time and you know the president has been, going on this trip, and his wife just found out he's having an affair, he is in his hotel room with his wife, and he dies. What do you think the newspapers immediately jump to the conclusion? She kills him. Now, the bad part is she makes this more credible because she says, we are not going to do an autopsy on the president. Now, since that time, historians do believe that he just had a heart attack. But his wife's looking pretty guilty at the time, right? So this is his last scandal. Did his wife kill him because he was having sex with another woman? We don't know what would have happened or anything like that. However, he is dead. So now we change presidents, right? What happens when a president dies? The vice president becomes president. The vice president is a guy named Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge has this, he's very introverted. He's like, I don't need to go out and talk. And in fact, when he becomes president, he is not in D.C. He is up, I believe, in Connecticut with his dad hanging out. So they try to reach his dad, but his dad doesn't have a telephone. So they have to drive someone up to the dad's house. The guy comes into, up to the house. It's 3 a.m. He knocks on the door. Mr. Harding comes down to the door. He's like, what is going on? And what do you think they say? Oh, come on.
President's dead.
The president's dead. We need your son because he's the new president of the United States. Now, at this point, do you think Mr. Harding kind of gets woke up and is like, oh, okay. Yes. So he runs upstairs. He grabs his son, Calvin. He's like, hey, you need to come downstairs. Harding is dead. You're the new president of the U.S. So Calvin Coolidge comes down. His dad is a local leader. So he is a justice of the peace, I believe. Anyway, long story short, at his dad's house, he is sworn in as president. And what is his first act as president? He goes back to bed because he's like, yeah, it's 3 a.m. I'm going back to bed. So now Calvin Coolidge is the president. Calvin Coolidge is like the anti-Teddy Roosevelt. Calvin Coolidge is known as Silent Cal. There's a story about him. The story wound up not being true, which is sad because it's a really cool story. But it kind of gives you a perspective about him. Calvin Coolidge says, when the president speaks, it's important and people need to listen. And because it's important that people listen when the president speaks, if the president wants to make sure that they are listened to, they need to say as little as possible. Right? So instead of being out there and talking and telling everybody all sorts of stuff, he's like, I'm going to sit here. Congress needs to run the U.S. When I need to say something, I will. But other than that, I'm going to kind of step back. I'm going to let Congress run it. And he says, the business of the United States is business. So if he believes the business of the U.S. is business, who does he want to run things? Well, Congress and businesses. He's like, let things be. Just stay out of their way. So is he a progressive? No. He is the one that is probably the opposite of the progressives. He is going to be like, hey, I'm going to stand back, let things happen, let things work. He does think that the national debt is too high because it's after World War I and we have paid a lot of money. He says we need to pay down the debt. He reduces regulations on businesses, and he really does work to get rid of the corruption in government. So his goal is to, it's funny, kind of the progressive perspective of have a smaller government or have a government that is responsive to the people and allows the people to do things, but he is definitely not acting in ways that we would normally consider progressive, right? He does do a great job of restoring public confidence in government. So, when it comes time for 1924, do you think people are happy with him? Yeah. People are like, you know what? He has shown integrity. He has done a good job. So they go ahead and renominate him. The Republicans do. The Democrats nominated a guy named John Davis. John Davis has a problem, though. The Democratic Party, there are two major constituents. The first constituent is the unions and the Northeast, right? The second constituent is the South. Now, do the goals of the unions in the Northeast and the goals of the South coincide? No. What do the unions in the Northeast want? They want minimum wage, right? They want shorter work hours. They want to get rid of prohibition. What does the South want? Cheap labor. They like prohibition. They like segregation. The guys in the Northeast don't, right? So the Democratic Party is kind of split. There is Robert La Follette. He takes advantage of this split and he says, you know what? We should go ahead and control, there should be a public control of the natural resources, public control of the railways, and everybody should have reduced taxes. Now, I am for that last part, but now you kind of have a split. La Follette takes his home state. Davis, where's Davis take? Yeah, the South. So he has got these guys to buy in, but he's lost all these guys. So who wins the election? Coolidge. Again, Coolidge takes 54% of the popular vote. At this point, you actually have a significant wins in popular votes as well as the Electoral College. All right. So Coolidge, do you think he's going to change how he is president? No. It worked for him the first time. It's continuing to work. So he goes ahead and does the same thing. I'm not going to speak out on things. I'm going to just go ahead and let Congress run things, let business run things. There is one other piece that turns out to be a huge, huge factor in his life. His son is playing tennis at the White House. Now, did your mom ever tell you to put socks on when you wear shoes? Did she tell you why?
Because it'll rub sores on your feet.
It will rub sores on your feet. So, Coolidge's son goes out to play tennis. He does not put his socks on. The shoe actually rubs a blister into his foot, and it winds up that the blister gets infected. His son dies because he wore shoes without socks. Now, that's a big, jump. But it winds up that this infection kills him. So for the last 4 years of Coolidge's presidency, we really believe that he was suffering from very, very severe depression. I mean, if you think about it, if your son died, do you think that you would be pretty depressed? So he was accomplishing what he had to, but he really wasn't excited about being president. He was like, I just, I want to be left alone. I don't want to deal with this. So in 1928, before the election, he is out on vacation. He's out with his wife, and the reporters come up and they say, hey, when are you going to put your name in the hat for the presidency? And he winds up looking at them and he says, I'm not. I am not going to run. I don't want to be president anymore. His wife was shocked. He never talked to his wife about this. But now the Republicans have to figure out who are they going to replace him with, right? Do people like Coolidge? Yeah. So now you have to replace a likable guy. You got to figure out, who do we put in? They're looking around, and there's a guy named Herbert Hoover. Hoover was born, he was orphaned really early, never grew up with a lot of money, but he decides that his way to success is college. He goes to Stanford and gets an engineering degree. And within a couple years, he actually becomes a millionaire. So he is kind of that self-made man that let's figure out how to do it on your own, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of guy, right? And then once he makes his money, he starts helping other people. So during World War II, Netherlands struggled because Germany invaded. Long story short, there's a lot of people over in Europe that are struggling. They don't have food. They don't have the ability to take care of themselves. So Hoover uses his own money to set up an organization to feed the people in Europe. Now, does this seem like a guy that you would want as president? I mean, let's walk through it. Self-made man, grew up poor, multimillionaire. Once he has the millions, he is going to help other people, right? So everybody's like, yeah, this sounds really, really good. They nominate Herbert Hoover. Hoover doesn't really hate prohibition, but he never says that he likes it. It's just like, okay, whatever. He does like civil rights. He does push for the Equal Rights Amendment, who, by the way, who are those equal rights for?
African Americans.
Actually, African Americans have now the right to vote. Women now have the right to vote, but Equal Rights Amendment is for women. So he's impressing all the women, right? The Democrats select a guy named Alfred E. Smith. Alfred E. Smith is a Catholic from New York. So he is against prohibition. Now, if you're a Democrat and you're against prohibition, who did you just tick off? The South, right? Because most of the people in the South like prohibition, right? So he does say he's against the Equal Rights Amendment. So who does he tick off? Women. And he is tied to Tammany Hall, who is the corrupt city government of New York City. So at the end of the day, Hoover wins 58% of the popular vote. And if you notice, Smith does not even take New York. He takes a couple of the states up here, and he doesn't even do that well in the South, right? So now Hoover's the president. This should be a wonderful time for Hoover, right? You get to be president, life is great. There's a small problem. What happens while Hoover is president?
Great Depression.
Yeah. We move into the Depression. Why does the Depression happen?
Multiple different things.
Okay, there's multiple reasons. Let's just toss some out there. What is going on? Say it again.
Stock market.
Okay, the stock market collapses. Let's go back a few years. The stock market keeps going up and up and up, right? Now, what is the stock market supposed to be built on? How well you think that the companies are doing, right? So what starts to happen is the stock markets make more money than interest does in the bank. So if you want to make money off of your money, you need to put it in the stock market, right? So everyone puts their money in the stock market rather than banks. And I should be cautious with that. Many people put their money in stock markets rather than the bank. So now you have the stocks continue to go up. Well, what winds up happening is I can make more money from the stocks than it costs me to borrow money. Does that make sense? So if it makes me more money to put money in the stock market than I can make, or then it will cost me to borrow, then what is there going to be a temptation for me to do?
Take the money out of the stock market.
Okay, I will want to borrow money
Yeah.
from someone else and put it in the stock market. Is this a good decision? Okay, I'm seeing a few people say no. Why?
It can go down.
Okay, yeah, as long as the stock market goes up, everything's great. But what happens if the stock market goes down?
You lost your money.
You lost your money, and now you owe people money that you can't pay back. But no one thinks about this. They're all just like, no, it's always going to go up. And it's very similar to what we have seen recently, right? Since the 80s, the stock market has just continually gone up. So my money market guy's like, oh no, there will be a slight correction, but it's going to go up. Put more money in. I'm like, yeah. Some of the other things that goes on is the profit margin increases faster than wages increase. So because people are throwing money into the stock market, the value of companies goes up. But if the value of the company goes up, you can either pay your workers more or you can put more money into the company. And the big bosses are like, you know what? We should put more money into the company because we're making so much money that this is what is important, right? And we'll just continue to make more and more money. So you have the market outpacing wages. You have the stock market going up, people buying on margin. In Florida, people are like, the value of land is going up. So again, we have seen this, right? What are housing prices doing? Yeah. The house that we bought less than 5 years ago has actually gone up 50% in value. Now, is that realistic? Is my house really worth 50% more than I paid for it? No. But what's going on? All right, because the price of houses is going up, everybody's like, oh, well, I need to get a house before they go up anymore, right? And so people are buying houses that they may not be able to afford. Plus, I now say, oh, well, if I have a decent house, I can sell it for more money than I paid for it, and then I can buy a nicer house, and I'll buy it before that house goes further up in price, right? And so all the prices start bumping up in price. All the houses and the neighborhoods keep going up, so they start building more and more houses to keep up with the market, right? Now, does anybody see any concerns with this? Because if you remember, what's happening with wages? They're going up, but not nearly as quickly as prices. So when wages don't go up as high as prices and as quickly as prices, what happens to your ability to buy things? You lose the ability to buy things. And over time, which is more important, to buy a new house or to buy food? Food. And so now, when people see, oh wait, I can't afford this house, they already have the mortgage, right? And the bank forecloses. Once the bank forecloses, this is where things start to get ugly. Does the bank want your house? Can the bank use your house? No. They don't have people to live in their houses. So what do they need to do? If the bank owns my house, what is the first thing they're going to do with it? They're going to sell it. Now, they're going to sell it at an auction, right? So usually when you sell a house at auction, it doesn't go as high as a regular house sale. And once you start auctioning off a lot of these houses, what happens to the price of houses? It drops. And once the price of these houses drop, if I borrowed a load of money to buy a house that's worth $350,000, but the house is now only worth $250,000, and I know that I'm going to have to continue to pay, and I don't have the money, what do I might as well do? I file bankruptcy and I stop paying the mortgage. Now, at that point, the bank loses a load of money, and they start collapsing on all of their other houses and saying, well, we're not going to let everybody declare bankruptcy, so I'm going to foreclose. Once you have loads of foreclosed houses, the market just continues to drop, the value of homes continues to drop, and now you have the stock market, which has been rising and rising and rising. So you have all this stuff kind of hitting at the same time. In addition, just prior to this, Congress was called the $1 Million Congress because they are handing out money hand over fist to people. What happens when you hand out money hand over fist to people? The value of the dollar drops. So you have this convergence of everything all occurring at once. You have the dollar dropping, you have the value of the bubble and the real estate market dropping, you have the stock market bubble crashing, and across the world, France and England and Germany are all trying to pay people money, right? And they're all poor and everybody's broke and nobody has the money. So now you have the crash. Banks close. At this point, you don't have the FDIC. What does the FDIC do for you? Anybody have loads of money in the bank? Not that you're going to admit to me, right? The FDIC is the Federally Deposited Insurance Company, something like that. They insure your money. If you have, I think it's up to $150,000 in the bank, they guarantee that if the bank closes, you'll get your money back. At this time, there is no FDIC. So when the bank closes, what happens to your money?
It's gone.
It's gone. You don't have, you saved $50,000, the bank closes, and your money is gone. Now, if that was the money you were paying off your home loan with, what happens to your home?
It gets taken away.
Your home gets taken. So all of a sudden, from everything going great in the 20s where you have flappers and we're going to spend money and we're going to do all this cool stuff, now everything crashes. And so you have overproduction in the markets because they're still producing like everything's going to sell, but nobody has the money to buy. And so now the factories crash. When the factories crash, what happens to jobs? Everybody loses their job. And if you lose your job, you lose your income. So now, do you see how this kind of just turns into this horrible, like, roller coaster? And everything crashes all at once. So now you have loads and loads of people with no jobs, no homes. There are homeless camps. You probably have heard of it. Lots of people commit suicide because they're like, well, we can't, I don't know what to do. I don't have any money. The weird part for me, I always understood that during the Depression, everybody suffered. What we really find out is 40% of Americans actually did fine. I mean, they tightened their belt and they tried to make things better, but they didn't get homeless, they didn't lose everything. So there are 40% of Americans who have enough money that they don't suffer at all. Many others, they suffer a little bit, but they've made it. But there's like 30 to 40% of America that is now homeless, is now without a job. And so now there's real problems. How does Hoover respond? Hoover says, look guys, when everything was going great, everybody just did stupid stuff. This is a correction. This is capitalism. If everyone is paying way too much for stuff, then now everything's going to drop. Hold your breath and it'll be okay. If you're one of the people that lost your job, lost your home, when the president says, hey, hold your breath for a little bit, everything will be okay, what do you think?
It won't be all right.
Yeah, you're like, no, I've got to have something now. He tries to be encouraging. He talks to the companies and he goes, look, go ahead and keep your people working. Take the hit to the profit, but keep your employees working. As a businessman, that is the smartest thing you could do, right? Why? Because if you keep paying your workers, they can pay for their houses, they can pay for things that you produce. But when you start firing all the workers, what happens to the people that are not, or that were buying all your goods? They're gone. And so the factories are collapsing because they refuse to take care of their employees. They start federal construction jobs, but there's just not enough to go around. And so he says, all right, let's reduce taxes and loan money to people so that they can get through this. He declares a moratorium on war debt. And he says, look, we're not going to ask you to pay your debts. Just survive. Finally, he comes up with the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and they loan money to the states. The federal government gives money to the states and says, come up with jobs for these people. Why wouldn't he just give money straight to the people?
They have to earn it.
Because at this point he says, if you don't earn it, you're going to get in your head that I can't get a job. I'm not able to do things. And he's like, no, we want people to keep their self-respect. We want people to be able to work and earn their money so that they can get ahead. And when this is over, they will retain their self-worth and they will get back to working. All right. This is the ugliest part of the entire thing. Back during World War I, there was a promise made that if you served in World War I in 1945, the government would give you $1 for every day you served stateside or $1.25 for every day that you served overseas. Now, have you guys seen the commercial on TV? It's my money, I want it now. Yeah, what do you think these guys did? If you're out of work and you don't have the money and you can't pay for your house, what are you going to tell the federal government?
Give me the money you promised.
It's my money, give it to me now. And so a lot of people said, hey, I can't wait for 1945. I might be dead in 1945. Give me the money now. 20,000 traveled to DC and they're like, hey, give us our money. We need our money. Please take care of us. So Hoover, if you go into a federal office, can they hand you money that Congress has not approved? No. So Hoover's like, guys, you can't do this. And he thinks that the 20,000 people are pushed there by communists who are trying to overthrow the government. The House approves the money. Senate says, look, we don't have this kind of money right now. That'll just make the Depression worse because money will be worth less. So even the people that don't get the money will be hurt by this. So once they realize that nobody's going to pay them, a lot of them left. The federal government says, why aren't these people leaving that haven't left? It's a lot of them spent their last dollar trying to get to DC, so they hand them train tickets and they go back home. And so more people leave. However, there are many who stay, and some of them decide, you know what? We're going to break into the government buildings. We're going to force the issue. So the police are told, get them out of the buildings. When they do, they try to arrest them, and some people are hurt and a couple of people are killed. Now, do you want that? That's a really ugly perspective, right? So nobody wants this. So they're like, okay, how do we stop this? Let's call the Army. They actually bring in the Army because they're like, the Army has a bunch of veterans. These guys are veterans. They'll respect the Army will respect them. No. Douglas MacArthur comes in, and instead of helping, he just shoves them out, and he drives them out of town. As he does this, he sees that they have a little camp, and he's like, you know what? The best thing I can do, I'll go ahead and I will burn this camp because then they'll have to leave. Well, the problem with that is there are wives and children in this camp. And so when he burns the camp, he kills the wives and children of these Army veterans. This is kind of the absolute bottom of the Depression. All right, so you guys remember, how does France and England take care of their debts to the U.S.?
Germany.
Okay, and they get money from Germany. How does Germany get their money? They borrow from the U.S. So the U.S. winds up paying Germany so Germany can pay France and England so France and England can pay the U.S., right? And it's really stupid. All right, Kellogg Beyond, how effective is it?
Not very.
Not. All right, and what are some of the things that causes the Great Depression? Stock market crash, the overproduction, failing to pay wages, right? All right. So for next class period, we will be going through Franklin Roosevelt, and the New Deal. All right. I will do my best to ensure the computer works next time. Hopefully you guys are working on your papers. Has everybody started working on those, talking to people? All right. Thank you very much. I will see you later.